What is going on, gunfighters? If you don't know, there's a Patreon group, and inside all the patrons, there's an insider chat where we chat back and forth and help each other out. Today's episode is going to be related to that. One of the guys in the group is fairly new to hunting, but he's been going at it really hard. And sadly, right before hunting season, his main hunting rifle went out on him. And we're talking, I'm not going to name names either of the patron or the equipment, but he had a really, really nice, super high-end hunting rifle go down on him right before the hunt. And then he had his backup. He was going to hunt with his AR. And he, again, got in the scope and then got in the mounts, and he had trouble with that, and that the mounts weren't the right ones for the scope. And deer season's about to start. And he said he might hunt with his 500, that being a Mossberg 12-gauge 500. And I've been trying to give him advice. That's part of the things that Patreons get. They get help from me and other people. So I thought this would make a good podcast episode. So I plan on sending this to him as soon as I get a chance to, as I'm on the road right now recording this. But I thought it would also be helpful for other people out there. You see, I talked about growing up poor in the South, and I've talked before about like the poor man's redneck deer hunting rifle of the day was an SKS because they were so cheap and kind of ubiquitous at the time, and the ammo was cheap. But I didn't even have that. I grew up hunting deer with a shotgun. My uncle gave me an old bolt action 410 shotgun, Mossberg bolt action 410, that I was very blessed to be able to hand down to my nephew. After that, I had a single shot 20 gauge, and then I saved up my own money and got a pump action 12 gauge, and then later a semi-auto 12 gauge, all while growing up in the South before I joined the Marine Corps. And I did all of my deer hunting up until the point I was able to save up and get a 7 Rem mag. I did all my deer hunting up until that point with a shotgun. And I've done quite a bit of deer hunting and other big game hunting with a shotgun, even when I had rifles, if it was a better tool for the job. So I thought that this podcast episode would be helpful to more than just that one patron. So I'm going to try and send it to him first so we can get it in time. And then I'll try and give it to you guys as well, to the greater audience. I know deer season is starting in a lot of places across the country. And you know that I've said if you can only have one gun, if I could only have one gun for, I usually say the zombie chipmunks, but maybe now the radioactive chipmunks when they come, to be ready. If I could only have one gun, it would be a 12-gauge shotgun. And maybe some of you have taken that advice. So if you have and you want to be able to hunt deer or other big game with that gun, I'm going to give you an episode about that today. So, stay tuned. So, hunting with a shotgun. I'm going to primarily be talking about the 12 gauge. It's the most common, most ubiquitous gauge. If I don't say any other caveats like, oh, with the 20 gauge or oh, with the 410, assume I'm talking about a 12 gauge. You can hunt with those other gauges, and hopefully I'll get into that today. Doing this off the cuff for somebody I'm very humbled to have as part of the community. And I'm doing this while on a road trip with the wife. So, no notes, nothing like that. But with that, let's get into hunting deer and other large game with a shotgun. Again, in my youth, I grew up running around the backwoods of Virginia and the Mid-Atlantic hunting with a shotgun. I don't remember how many deer I took with a shotgun before I ever hunted with a centerfire rifle. The shotgun was kind of the working man's tool to put food on the table, because not only could I hunt deer with it, I could hunt ducks with it, which were big where I'm from. I could hunt geese with it, I could hunt squirrel with it, I could hunt rabbit with it, and all that was meat for the freezer. That's how we saw it back then. That's how I grew up. Sadly, a lot of times today we hunt for sport. And don't get me wrong, I really love running through the woods back then with a shotgun. but the meat was for food. And I think for putting food on the table, the shotgun is the best tool. So let's get into how to best do that with a shotgun. You really have two options when it comes to hunting big game with a shotgun. And I'm primarily talking about deer, because deer are the most common big game across America, especially east of the Mississippi, where most of the population in the U.S. lives. You have buckshot, as the name implies, and you have slugs. Slugs don't really imply anything if you don't know what they are. They're literally a giant chunk of lead that is kind of shaped like the dot candy that you get when you go to the movie theater or whatever, that gummy candy. They're round on the top and flat on the bottom. But usually, unlike that, they're hollow. And the reason they're hollow is so that when that gas or that wad gets pushed up against them, it expands them so that they fit tight into the bore of the shotgun. And I'm talking about Foster slugs, which is the main kind of American slug. That's almost always what you're going to find if you go to a Walmart or a Big Five or most big sporting goods stores, unless they're specifically designed for hunting, like a Bass Pro Shop or a Cabela's. There you may find Bernanke slugs. Bernanke slugs are a different design. They're also a big hunk of lead, except they are basically a big cylinder with grooves cut in them that tend to be solid, with the wad attached to the bottom with a screw, almost like a giant, big, heavy lawn dart, if you want to think of it like that. Like the big, heavy piece of metal in the front and the fletchings or the wadding in the back. Think of it like a big, heavy lawn dart or the world's shortest arrow, with a big, heavy piece of metal in the front and the fletchings, the thing to help it fly true, in the back. I'll just briefly mention Bernanke slugs. I think they are probably a better design, but they're much less common here in America. And if you're talking about a everyman's working shotgun, you're probably talking about Foster slugs, because again, that's what you're going to find at Walmart, at whatever local store. They're far more common in the U.S. Also, colloquially, in some pockets of the U.S., you'll hear them referred to as pumpkin balls. They will have grooves cut in them. The grooves are for two reasons. They are to let that slug compress when it goes down the barrel, and compress enough to go through some chokes. They also will impart spin on the projectile. Now, some people will argue it's not enough to actually spin the projectile. I've seen slow motion footage where it shows the projectile actually spinning in that direction. So that leads me to believe that it does actually work. And I have several shotguns in the past and have one now that is so ridiculously accurate with slugs, it would be hard to imagine that they didn't impart some kind of gyroscopic stabilization to the round. All that being said, the accuracy of slugs wildly depends on the shotgun you're shooting, the type of slug. Just like with a rifle, you have to find a round that shoots good out of your gun. It's even more so, I think, with slugs, because some can be wildly accurate and some can be just crazy inaccurate. So you got to make sure that you are matching it, and don't just take, it's just, in my mind, borderline negligent if you just buy a box of slugs at Walmart and throw them in your shotgun and go out deer hunting and never sight it in. Those slugs could shoot a foot high, a foot left, a foot right. You don't even know at 25 yards, let alone at 50 or 75 yards. Just like I talk about with your defensive handgun, you have to shoot whatever load you're going to trust your life to out of your gun to make sure it hits where you're aiming. You got to do the same thing with your shotgun and your shotgun slug. Don't just assume that it's going to hit where the bead is. It's probably less vital if you're going hunting, because you're not trusting your life, a human life, you're trusting a deer's life. But you should still have some kind of respect for the life of that animal and God's creation, that you're not just going to randomly throw lead projectiles downrange and hope you hit something. That's not how I hunt, and I hope that's not how you hunt. That being said, take your shotgun, take the slugs that you plan to use, hopefully the first ones you buy will work, and pattern them. There are a lot of different kind of sighting systems on shotguns. If the shotgun just has a bead, which a lot of shotguns do, especially your typical all-around shotgun, you may want to think about getting some better sights that attach to a rib. Most modern shotguns will have a rib, and they generally make sights that clamp on either with just magnets or literally mechanically clamp on, so that you have a more traditional rifle style sight on your shotgun. This greatly enhances the accuracy of that shotgun. Not mechanical accuracy, but your ability to aim it well. And I think they're well worth a small fraction of the cost of what that shotgun probably costs you. So look at that. You may want to consider red dot or other optical sights on a shotgun. I should also mention that there are shotguns specifically designed to fire slugs with rifled barrels, just like a rifle. They're generally for localities that only allow hunting deer with a shotgun. I'm not talking about that today. That's a very specific kind of shotgun, and it kind of takes most of the other utility away from a shotgun. I'm talking about the general purpose smoothbore shotgun. Once you get your slugs, all you really need is something to fire them at. A large box with a target painted, a spray paint circle spray painted on it. You don't have to be a rocket scientist for this. You just need to put that box out, or a paper plate works really well, at the longest distance you intend to shoot a deer at, and make sure that you can hit the vital zone. I like to use a good rule of thumb, a paper plate. If you can put that slug inside a paper plate at that distance, that should be perfectly adequate to kill a deer. Again, we're not talking about a precision rifle and going out and shooting, a deer at 800 yards on a distant ridge line. We're talking about going in deep woods and thick cover and hunting with a shotgun to take deer. So there are two ways to hunt deer or other large game with a shotgun: buckshot and slugs. Let's talk about the buckshot. Buckshot generally starts at size number 4. Now this is important, not number 4 shot. Number 4 shot is something you would use on ducks or geese. It is not something you do use on deer. Number 4 buckshot. Number 4 buckshot is my favorite buckshot for large game and for home defense, but we'll leave that on the table for another time. Done whole episodes on the shotgun and different shot sizes, but just know that if it's legal in your area, I really like number 4 buck. Why do I like it? Because out of a 2 3/4 or a 3-inch shell, which I prefer, and just in a standard 3-inch number 4 buck load, I can get 41 pellets. 41 pellets is a lot of pellets. If we're talking about your standard double-aught buck load, you're talking usually 9 pellets. Going from 9 pellets to 41 pellets is a huge increase. To give you an idea, I do believe that number 4, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, is 24 caliber. I may be off a caliber or 2, but it's 20-something caliber. Let's say 24 caliber for the sake of argument. Again, verify this for yourself if you care. So, number 4 buck, I like it. It's 20-something caliber. You'll get anywhere from 27 pellets in a 2 3/4 is fairly standard to 41 pellets in a 3-inch. Number 4 buckshot works really well. And again, you have to test this out of your shotgun to make sure it shoots where you're aiming. Don't just assume that it will. You must pattern your shotgun, and you must know for you how many pellets in that kill zone is going to be adequate for you to think that you can successfully harvest that animal. If you want to get an analog for a deer, like an actual deer size and shape target, you certainly can do that. A good rule of thumb that has been used for a long time is just a paper plate, just a regular, normal dinner plate size paper plate. And you set your standard for you. Again, you should have some kind of respect for one of God's creation that you're going to rise, kill, and eat. You should have some respect for that. Don't just go and randomly shoot at an animal thinking, oh, I can probably kill it at this distance. You should be reasonably sure that you can put enough pellets on target at a given distance to take that animal. And whatever your standard is, if you think that 5 number 4 buckshot pellets in that kill zone is your limit, then if you can get 5 out of your shotgun with you shooting it at 25 yards, that's your distance with that load. If you can get 5 in that same paper plate at 50 yards out of your shotgun with you shooting it, then that's probably your given distance that you can hunt with that load. Again, assuming that 5 is your number, you may decide that 10 is your number. Moving up from number 4, you may also want to consider number 4 heavily if you are talking about hunting with a 20 gauge, because double-aught does not stack very well in a 20 gauge. The cylinder does not lend itself well to stacking double-aught buck in a 20 gauge the way it does in a 12. So you may seriously consider a smaller shot size, whether that's number 4 buck or something smaller for the 20 gauge. Going back, the most common buckshot for the 12 gauge is going to be double-aught buck. It's the most common for military, for police, and for hunting use. Whether that's right or wrong, that's probably the buckshot you're going to find most readily, and it works. It works great. Double-aught buck, if I remember correctly, is something like 33 caliber. It's a 33 caliber projectile, moving at roughly, and this is just a ballpark, somewhere around 1,200 feet a second, which may strike you as fairly similar to a 9mm. If you think about that, 9mm is .355 caliber and is traveling about the same velocity. Now, it's not the same. It's a much heavier projectile because it's elongated and it's designed to expand if you're using modern expanding projectiles. But you got to remember, you're getting 9 of them instead of 1 at a time. You're dumping generally 9 at a time into an intended target. And you can determine what you think is appropriate for you. You may decide that 3 is your standard and you want to get 3 in that paper plate at a given distance. But know that they are much heavier, bigger projectiles. You're going from 24 caliber to 33 caliber. And again, that's going to be your most common load for buckshot, at least here in the U.S. Another fairly common one, if you're moving to big game, is triple-aught buck. Triple-aught buck is slightly bigger, I believe. Off the top of my head, it's 36 caliber. And you will find loadings for this in the 12 gauge. You will also ironically find it commonly in the 410, which is the smallest of the gauges. And that's because the 410 is so small, you generally can't stack buckshot side by side in it. You're generally stacking buckshot one on top of each other. And if you're going to do that, you might as well go with the biggest buckshot you can. So ironically, the smallest gauge you'll often find loaded with the largest common buckshot, which is triple-aught buck. And some will say that a 410 with buckshot is not adequate for taking deer. But as somebody that grew up hunting deer with a 410, I will argue that it is perfectly adequate. Again, several 33 caliber projectiles traveling down the bore at decent velocities, 1,300 feet a second, to me is adequate. So if you're going to hunt with a 410 with buckshot, I think it's perfectly adequate to use triple-aught buck. Again, check to make sure it's legal. Some places I don't know if it's even legal to hunt deer with a 410. So those are your common buckshot sizes. Let's talk about buckshot through chokes. Some chokes will do rather well with buckshot and some won't. It really depends on the buckshot and the choke. You really have to decide for you and test that out of your gun. It's really specific. Some, like number 4 buck, may do really well out of a full choke in your shotgun, whereas double-aught buck may do horrible out of a full choke in your shotgun. It may shoot worse than just a pure cylinder bore out of your shotgun. So you have to test it out of your gun to know what is best for you. Shotguns are so individual. It's kind of like dating women. If you're in that stage in your life, and I'm very blessed that I am not in that stage, that God has blessed me with a wife, but if you're in that stage where you're dating, like, don't just assume because the last girl that you dated liked Thai food, that the new girl that you're dating likes Thai food. That would be a stupid assumption on your part. Don't just assume because birdshot shoots good with a full choke out of your gun that buckshot is going to shoot good out of a full choke in your shotgun. Or don't assume that because buckshot shoots good out of somebody else's shotgun that your shotgun is going to like it. You have to test it for yourself. Get to know your gun and your load like you would get to know a woman that you are dating. Why might you want to use buckshot in the first place? Well, the whole point of buckshot is it gives you multiple projectiles. And that's really good, especially in really dense cover or on moving game. Not everybody hunts deer out of a tree stand. Sometimes you're spotting and stalking. Sometimes you are in really thick, dense cover and you're literally trying to push those animals out of cover. And if you get a shot, it might be a jump shot. Literally, that deer might be jumping through the air when you shoot it. And for that, multiple projectiles up close is good. It's probably the most preferable. As far as safety goes, you may be hunting in a densely populated area on the outskirts of a suburb, somewhere where it's legal to hunt, but you don't want your shot to carry. Those projectiles are going to shed velocity and energy much faster than a traditional rifle round is. So that may be another reason to go with buckshot. Also, shooting in dense cover. If you're shooting in, let's say, through a bush or something like that, the odds that all 9 pellets are going to hit a twig or something is a lot less likely than one rifle round hitting a branch or a twig and getting deflected. So that's another reason you may choose buckshot over something else. Anyway, that's buckshot in a nutshell, down and dirty for deer hunting. If you were looking for a place to start, assuming you have a 12 gauge, I would recommend highly number 4 buck. If you can find 3-inch 41 pellet, that'd be my go-to. If you can't get that, my next go-to, because it's probably most common, is going to be the traditional double-aught buck 9 pellet. And I think that in general, you might want to try a modified choke for this or an improved cylinder choke. Again, a lot of times a full choke will not do well with buckshot. They don't compress. They're a lot bigger than normal birdshot. So if you don't have a lot of time to experiment, you may want to try it with an improved cylinder or modified choke with either number 4 or double-aught buck and see how that does for you. I can't stress enough, just because it is buckshot doesn't mean that you don't have to pattern it, you don't have to, test it. You have to put in as much or more work than you would with a rifle. So let's talk about some of my favorite loads for the shotgun for deer hunting specifically. Now, I've mentioned my fondness for number 4 buck. Number 4 buck is not always my go-to, but number 4 buck is generally my default. If I'm going big game hunting, my first thought is number 4 buck. And if not, why not? Is there something better? And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes, triple-aught buck is better. There is a reason that it exists. Sometimes double-aught is better. I don't know how double-aught came to be the standard, but it is the standard. It's just carte blanche. So maybe what you're familiar with, if your shotgun is mostly, you live in the city, in the suburbs, you're going to try hunting, and you have a bunch of double-aught buck, and you train with it as you should, and you pattern it, and you know where number 4 buck shoots for you. As I was, if you know where, double-aught shoots for you in your gun, if you know where your standard Remington or Winchester Walmart load of 9 pellet double-aught buck shoots for you in your gun, and you know the distances and the ranges and you can run it, then that's probably the load for you. However, again, I like number 4 buck. Do your own research, your own ballistics, look into that. But I like number 4 buck. I like it a lot. Especially for a 20 gauge, and ironically not for a 410, for a 410 triple-aught. Again, because just of the way pellets stack and geometry, and yes, kids, math does play into shooting quite a bit. So it may depend on the gauge, it may depend on a lot of things, but I really like number 4 buck. Kind of my go-to, and probably because I remember it from when I was a kid, is the Remington. The Remington green, I think it's a green and yellow box. It may be green and white. I'm sure it's gone through different iterations, but it's a green box of Remington number 4 buck 3-inch 41 pellet. Now, I know I'm comparing apples to oranges because it's a 3-inch load, but most modern shotguns will shoot a 3-inch load, that's 41 pellets versus your kind of standard, 9 pellets of double-aught buck. Now, if you move into a 3-inch, which would be my go-to if I was specifically choosing hunting, because fast follow-up shots are not as important because you have to reacquire your target in hunting. It's not like, on a range, if you're practicing defensive shooting, you're probably not doing double taps. So I'm less concerned with the fast follow-up shot. So if I was going to hunt with double-aught, they do make 3-inch, generally 12 pellet or maybe even 15 pellet double-aught loads. Even so, I'd rather have 41 pellets at number 4. But that same green load of Remington, you may consider that. My go-to, though, if I can get it in double-aught, is the Federal Flight Control. Now, a lot of things in ballistics and new kind of things are, I think, a lot marketing and gimmicky. I don't think the Federal Flight Control wads are that. I have seen firsthand how awesome those things are. My old Benelli M1, which is a smooth cylinder bore, would put the 9 pellets on an IPSC silhouette target at 50 yards, all 9 pellets, with just a smooth bore, no choke, with that Federal Flight Control. That is awesome. The Federal Flight Control, in my opinion, is the best buckshot design. I wish I could get number 4 in that. I don't think that they make it. If they do, I've never seen it. But the Federal Flight Control is awesome. If you want to shoot longer shots with buckshot, that would be my go-to load. That being said, if I'm going to do longer shots, I might be going to a slug. But if I want long shots with buckshot, Federal Flight Control is, in my opinion, the best option for that. The caveat, again, I said you got to test these things for you out of your gun. Federal Flight Control is designed for the wad to stay. If you don't know what a wad is, look it up. It's what the shot is contained in, not the shell itself, but the part inside the shell. If you don't know, there's a little cup that separates the powder from the buckshot in most modern loads. Well, the Federal Flight Control is designed to stay with the buckshot longer. So for that to happen, generally you need an open choke, an improved cylinder, or an open choke. And some improved cylinders may strip that wad away. A cylinder bore almost certainly won't. But you probably don't want to shoot flight control through a full choke or a modified choke. So again, you have to know and test this stuff out for yourself. But if you have a go-to shotgun that's improved cylinder or open choke, and that's what it is, and you don't want to change anything on it, then you might want to consider a Federal Flight Control. And I'm not sponsored by Federal or anything, but my go-to slug is also Federal, and it's the Federal True Ball. The True Ball is basically a ball that's in the back of the slug that forces it to expand perhaps better. It works with a special kind of wad to shove it up into the bore to kind of give it more positive and more concentric contact with the bore. I don't think, again, that this is just marketing or gimmicky. It may be they're just made better to better tolerances because it's like their premium load. I don't know what the reason is, but in my experience, the Federal True Ball rifled slugs are ridiculously accurate in the Benelli shotguns that I run. The Benelli shotgun, I only own one now. I've gotten rid of a few. But they have been very, very, very accurate. And if I have the opportunity and they shoot good out of my gun, I will run the Federal True Ball slugs. If I'm going to shoot a lot of slugs, like to pattern my gun or for competition or any number of reasons why I would shoot a lot of slugs, I'm going to train a lot. If you've ever tried to clean slug residue out of a bore, it is laborious to say the least. So for that, I like the Federal Deep Penetrator slugs. And not because they're deep penetrators. I think the regular Foster slugs will penetrate more than adequately for almost anything, but because they are copper plated. And hopefully that copper plating will reduce some of the fouling in the bore of the shotgun. And again, if you've ever cleaned a shotgun that's severely leaded with slug residue, it is a tedious process, or at least it can be. Anyway, those are some of my go-to loads for big game hunting. Real quick, in kind of smallest to largest, I like the 3-inch Remington Green 41 pellet number 4 buck. I also like the Federal 3-inch, I believe it's 15 pellet of double aught buck in their 3-inch Magnum. And if I'm going long range with buckshot, I like the Federal Flight Control wad double aught buck. And if I am going for even larger, I like, again, going back to the Remington Green Hull triple aught buck. And I think that's 12 pellet if I remember correctly. I am driving on a road trip, so you'll have to forgive if some of these numbers are wrong. I hope verify for yourself. But those are all good loads. And if we're talking slugs, I really do like the Federal True Ball rifled Foster style slugs. And I also very much like the deep penetrator slugs. Again, mostly just because they're copper plated. If I'm doing high volume of training. For hunting, not a big deal, but if I want to pattern a shotgun and shoot it a lot, then I'm probably going to hunt with that same slug load. So for that reason, I like those deep penetrators. Anyway, you choose whatever load is best for you and your shotgun, but those might be a good place to start and to try your testing with, at least an initial amount of testing with those loads. Anyway, some favorite shotgun loads. So why would one choose to hunt with a shotgun? Well, let's start off with why I did growing up, because I didn't know it at the time, but fairly poor, and the shotgun was what I had. It was my tool to hunt pretty much everything from small game to, and I'm talking small like snipe, to waterfowl, ducks and geese, and pretty much anything. Deer. So, because that's what you have, and if you've listened and you've taken the advice, or you came to the conclusion on your own that if you're going to have one gun or one long gun, it should be a shotgun, because it's the best tool, it's the most versatile tool to put food on the table, whatever that food might be. Anything from, a Tweety bird, and don't think you can't get that hungry that a Tweety bird looks delicious. Anything from a Tweety bird or a robin to, an elk. Or for defense, the shotgun is the tool. So because it's what you have. Also, another reason is you may have multiple guns, but you don't know what you're going to encounter. So you may have a really nice deer rifle, and I have, by God's grace, really nice deer rifles. And a lot of times if I'm just going out, and this is not just a thought experiment for me, often when I was in, let's say, the Sawtooth Wilderness of Idaho, I would just go out to survive, by God's grace, with a Bible and my pack full of stuff and a shotgun. And that's what I would take, because I didn't know what I would encounter. I could encounter a big nasty bear. I could encounter, any number of things to eat. So in that case, I didn't just want a deer rifle. Also, another one is terrain. If you were in the military, this doesn't just apply to going into combat, but METTC. You can look that up. I'm not going to get into that. But terrain. The biggest bear hitherto that I have ever shot was with a shotgun. And this is at a time when I was blessed by God to have very many nice guns and good rifle. I don't remember at the time how many rifles I had, but I certainly had a good rifle that I had taken many deer and things with. But why did I take a shotgun that day? Well, because I was hunting in really thick, rolling hills of dense manzanita. And if you know what manzanita is, and you know what that kind of country is, it's really thick, dense scrub brush. And I was going to be spot and stalk and still hunting. And so a long shot in that area probably wasn't likely. It's not that it wasn't possible. There was like outcroppings where I could see valleys of manzanita and I could see hundreds and hundreds of yards. But I was spot and stalk hunting, and it was more likely that I was going to get a shot at a bear at 5 yards than at 500 yards. And if I saw that bear at several hundred yards, my idea was to stalk in much closer because I like to spot and stalk hunt. Anyway, I took the largest bear that I've ever taken with a shotgun because it was the best tool for the job in that terrain, in my experience, in my opinion at the time. And it worked, by God's grace, quite well. He blessed me with a very large bear. So terrain, you may decide that even though you have a nice rifle, that's the best tool for the job. If I'm shooting through a little bit of manzanita, that scrub brush, and I'm, just like anything else, do your due diligence and be safe. Don't just think you see a bear in the manzanita and shoot at it. That would be unsafe and borderline, well, not even borderline, that would just be negligent. But if you see a bear and you know it's a bear and there's no other things around it, and you have to shoot through a little bit of manzanita or choke cherry or something like that because that's what they're eating and that's where they're in, then, buckshot does a good job at that. That's a good tool for the job. Also, sometimes a big, moderately moving hunk of lead at a moderate velocity, but a big, heavy hunk of lead, a 12-gauge slug, is about one of the deadliest close-range things you can have. And again, if terrain dictates that you aren't going to be able to see or shoot much more than, 75 yards, then why wouldn't you take that? Especially, like, let's say, complete opposite of hunting the, high western rolling hills covered in manzanita. Let's say you're hunting in the swamps of Louisiana or somewhere like that, somewhere akin to that, where you're maybe in a canoe in cypress swamps, which is, an area I used to hunt growing up and things like that, where it's much more likely you're going to get a shot at a deer climbing out of the water, 20 yards away than you are. You're never going to see, really, in that environment more than 75 yards. So why do you need a gun that's going to do that? And the quick, fast handling aspects of a shotgun are going to give you a more likely success ratio than a scoped rifle. Especially most deer hunting rifles, the classic, let's say 30-06 with a 3-9 scope. That's a great deer hunting combo, but not for every situation. That 3 power, that magnification is great for longer range, but it is not great for getting a quick sight picture. It's not great for CQB. And the CQB equivalent in the hunting world for deer hunting is real close, dense jump shots. Another real common one, let's say you're doing a drive hunt where you're in really thick, dense cover. If you're in an area that has like salt marsh with really thick little islands that are thick full of shrubs and you're pushing deer out to other people and you're the pusher, if you do get a shot, you're in really thick, dense cover, it's going to be a few yards away. 1, the shotgun is the best tool to take the deer, and 2, it's the safest one because the shot is not going to carry far enough to be lethal to your guys that might be standing several hundred yards away in elevated positions to take deer that get pushed out of those islands on the salt marshes. And those are just a few examples. There's likely many more. Those are just ones I'm taking from my experiences. But because it's the best tool for the job, because the mission, if you consider hunting a mission, it gives the most likelihood to be successful, to put meat on the table. So that's just a little bit of why on the shotgun. Alright, so I'm back in the mobile studio, as it were, and I hope that you enjoy the improved audio quality. Show you how far we've come from the early days. Recorded that like I recorded for the first couple of years, and a lot of times in the car on the way back and forth to work or the range. By the grace of God and viewers like you, this podcast has grown and become better. The main source of income for this podcast is Patreon. I don't know if you're cool enough to be a patron, because all the patrons we have are really cool. If you do think you are cool enough and you want to support the podcast, you can go to goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, I'm going to throw in the tactical tip of the day. If you don't know about a cut shell, you can turn birdshot into slugs 2 ways. You can prop open the top and pour some wax or paraffin in there and basically congeal all the pellets into one big slug. Another simpler way is, if you're familiar with the anatomy of a shotgun shell, where the wad is, you can cut like 90% of the way around that, leaving a gap on both sides where it's still connected but barely. I would only ever do this unless I absolutely had to out of an open choke. But if you do that cut shell method, you can fire and all those pellets in theory should stay together inside that plastic hull down range, creating a quasi slug. Is it as good as a regular slug? No, by no means. If you had to defend yourself against something, or were starving to death and had a big game opportunity and all you had was birdshot, then that might be your only option, in which case it's going to be your best option. Anyway, with that, if you don't know about cut shells, that's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. And whatever man of the house of Israel, or of the strangers who dwell among you, who eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood, and will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, no one among you shall eat blood, nor shall any stranger who dwells among you eat blood. Whatever man of the children of Israel, or of the strangers who dwells among you, who hunts and catches any animal or bird that may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood and cover it with dust. It is the life of all flesh. Its blood sustains its life. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, you shall not eat the blood of any flesh, for the life of all flesh is in its blood. Whoever eats it shall be cut off. A good verse to ponder on there from Leviticus 17. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.